What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue here with my 2024 college football schedule preview and projected record series. TCU is up next, and before we preview their schedule for 2024 and give them an early projected record based on how tough their schedule is, let's take a look back at what TCU did in 2023. Here are my projections and predictions last year for TCU. My projection had them at 9-3, and then my prediction for them was 7-5. So I did predict TCU to have a big step back from where they were the year before in 2022, but it was obviously a lot worse than that. TCU just going 5-7 in 2023. So yeah, very disappointing season here for TCU. This is a team that we thought would still make a bowl game, regardless of how big the step back was from when they went to the national championship. So again, TCU coming off a 5-7 disappointing 2023 season. This was a schedule from last year for TCU. You obviously look at the non-conference schedule. They had to play Colorado, of course. That was the big week 1 game on September the 2nd. Ended up losing that game by 3 points. It was a really good back and forth game, but obviously TCU was the better team going into that game, and then obviously they lost to Colorado here in the non-conference. And they also played Nicole's and then SMU here in the non-conference. So their non-conference schedule was a little bit tough. SMU, you probably could say that's not a tough non-conference game, but SMU was a pretty good, respectable Group of 5 team last year. So yeah, they did have a tough non-conference schedule. And then you look at the losses coming in the Big 12 last year. They lost to West Virginia, Iowa State, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and then of course Texas and Oklahoma here in the Big 12 as well. So they did have a tough schedule in the Big 12, obviously. And then you look at the wins. They had Houston and BYU and Baylor. So they were able to pick up like 3 wins in the Big 12, but the schedule was pretty tough last year for TCU. And I just feel like that's the reason why they just didn't end up going to a bowl game last year. So that's the schedule from last season in 2023. Let's now look ahead to 2024. Here is the schedule for TCU for the upcoming season. And before we go game by game, let's take a look at who they will play on their non-conference schedule for this upcoming season. So this is their non-conference schedule. They will play Stanford on the road in week number 1, and then of course LIU, and then SMU here on the road as well. So they do get a couple of non-conference games here on the road with Stanford and SMU, 2 newcomers actually going to go to the ACC next year. That's a pretty interesting non-conference schedule, though, with Stanford. You know, they do have to travel on the road to play Stanford. That's going to be a long trip there in week number 1 of this season. Then, of course, SMU. I think SMU will be a tough, test here for TCU, even though it's like a game that probably TCU will be probably the better team, to be honest. But that's still a very tough game there in the non-conference. And then only one easy game here in the non-conference against LIU. So this is a pretty tough non-conference schedule for TCU heading into 2024. Let's go back to the schedule now here and go game by game now here for TCU. They will start things off, of course, with Stanford here on the road in week number 1 on August 31st. And then after that, they do play LIU here on September the 7th. Then they'll open up conference play on September the 14th against UCF. That'll be a home game there for TCU. And then they go on the road to play SMU here on September 21st. Then on the road at Kansas here on September the 28th. So they got back-to-back road games here with SMU and Kansas on September the 21st and September the 28th. Of course, one of them is a non-conference game, and then, of course, the other one's a conference game. Then they get to the month of October. They'll play Houston here at home on October the 4th. That'll be a Friday game, at home for TCU. And then they get a bye week here right before playing Utah here on the road on October the 19th. And then they play Texas Tech at home here on October 26th. And then they get to the month of November. They play Baylor here on the road on November 2nd. And then it's back at home for Oklahoma State here on November 9th. And then they get another bye week here in the month of November, and it really comes at a pretty good time, to be honest, against an Arizona team that was pretty good last year. They do get that game at home on November 23rd, and then they close things out with Cincinnati here on the road on November the 30th. So that is the schedule for TCU heading into 2024. This is a pretty tough schedule. I mean, obviously you got a very tough non-conference schedule with both Stanford and SMU both on the road out of the non-conference, and then you got Kansas and Utah, and obviously Baylor and Cincinnati both on the road. I think Kansas and Utah are pretty much going to be their toughest road games. And then obviously your toughest home games are probably going to be Texas Tech and then Oklahoma State. And then also Arizona, which probably could be a step back for them this year. But that's still a very interesting game regardless in the Big 12. So again, that's the schedule for TCU in 2024. Let's now get to the projection here for TCU for 2024. And this is the scale I use here for my projections. If it's a 1% game in the red, again, that percentage is counted as an automatic loss there. And then 20% games here in the orange will be games where TCU will be about a double-digit underdog in. And then 40% games here in the yellow will be games where TCU will be a clear underdog in by about a touchdown. And then 50-50 games will, of course, stay in the white. Games I think can go either way. Then your 60% games here in the purple are going to be games where TCU will be favored by about a touchdown. And then 80% games here in the blue are going to be games where TCU will be favored by double digits and also by about a couple touchdowns. And then 99% games here in the green are pretty much going to be games that are counted as easy wins and also automatic wins there in that percentage. So we'll start with the easy wins here for TCU. You really only have one easy win on here for TCU, and that's LIU here on September the 7th. This is only the easy win here for TCU. There's not really any other games on here in the green for me for this TCU team. You can make an argument that SMU should be, probably in the green and also maybe in the blue, but that's definitely a game that's going to be very tough this year for TCU. I think SMU probably will be a lot improved from where they were from last year and heading into their first year in the ACC. So again, that's the only easy win on here that I have for TCU. It's not a guaranteed win, but again, it's counted as an automatic win here in our projections for this year in 2024. And then you look at the rest of the games on here, pretty much Big 12 games. There's not really any other games on here where I can favor TCU in the Big 12 by double digits and also by about a touchdown. So let's skip over to the games now where TCU I think will be underdogs in. I don't have any automatic losses on here for TCU, and I also don't have any games where I think TCU will be a double-digit underdog. But I do have games on here where I think TCU will be a clear underdog in by about a touchdown. I do got 3 of them here in the yellow with Kansas, Utah, and Oklahoma State. So I think TCU will be a clear underdog in all 3 of these Big 12 games. You look at Kansas and Utah, both teams are, they're playing both of them on the road. That's the reason why both of these games turn out to be in the yellow. Kansas definitely probably one of those favorites to win the Big 12 this year. And then you got Utah, possibly the, highest favorite to win it all this year in the Big 12. Those are obviously going to be very tough road games. You get a bye week, though, right before the Utah game. Maybe that does help out TCU just a little bit, but it's still going to be a very tough road game regardless. But both of those games on the road are pretty much winnable games. And then, of course, Oklahoma State. You do get that game at home, but I think TCU will be a clear underdog in this game. So all 3 of these games are my clear underdog games here for TCU for 2024. And then I got 8 50-50 games on here for TCU for 2024 on this schedule with Stanford, UCF, SMU, Houston, Texas Tech, and then Baylor, and then Arizona and Cincinnati. All these games are pretty much 50-50 games I think can go either way. You look at Stanford and SMU both in the non-conference. I know those are 2 games that TCU should be favored in, but they're both on the road, so that's the reason why both of these games turn out to be 50-50 games. And then you look at UCF, Houston, Texas Tech, Baylor, and Arizona and Cincinnati. Like I said, I think everybody knows that the Big 12 is going to be so competitive this year. There is just a bunch of games that can go either way, and there's also a bunch of games where I think are just going to be so competitive. And again, a lot of these teams in the Big 12 are going to beat up on each other, so that's the reason why all these games are pretty much 50-50 games. And I got 6 50-50 games on here in the Big 12 for TCU for the upcoming 2024 season. So let's now get a projected record here for TCU for 2024. Again, this is not an official prediction. This is simply a projection based on how tough the schedule is. So we count that 1 green game as an automatic win against LIU, and then you average out those 3 yellow games at 40%. Then you average out all the 8 of these 50-50 games here at 50%, and the overall projected record for TCU comes out to be at 5-7 here for 2024. So a bit of a step back of a projection here for TCU compared to my projection last year. Again, 5-7 is the projection here for 2024. Can TCU turn things around and possibly make it to a bowl game this year? I think they can, but based off of where this team was from last year, it's kind of hard to tell how good they're going to be. And remember, a couple of years ago, TCU did, of course, go to the national championship, so it definitely was a big step back for them. But like I said, I think the Big 12 is going to be a lot competitive this year, and anything can happen regardless here in the Big 12. I think TCU does have a chance to go to a bowl game, but as of right now, the projected record for TCU is 5-7 here, based on how tough this schedule is for 2024. So give me your thoughts on this TCU team down in the comments below. What do you think their projected record is for 2024? Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned here for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports Channel.